It's a Tuesday afternoon in 2014. Elizabeth Holmes is standing in a bright white room at Theranos headquarters, a single drop of blood balanced on her fingertip, guiding it toward a sleek black box the size of a toaster. Investors watch. Cameras roll. She smiles the way she always smiles, steady, unblinking, certain. But the machine in front of her doesn't work. It has never worked. And somewhere behind that calm face, a decision is being made that will define one of the largest fraud cases in American history. The strange part isn't that she lied. The strange part is how she said it. Court testimony would later reveal that in many of these demonstrations, the blood wasn't even processed by the device at all. Sometimes the sample was secretly run on modified commercial machines in a back room. Sometimes the results were pre-loaded before the investor ever walked in. Holmes knew this. And yet, according to people who worked closest to her, she didn't present it like a lie. She presented it like a fact she simply hadn't gotten around to making true yet. To understand what happened inside her mind in that room, you have to go back further than Theranos, back to a 19-year-old Stanford dropout who told people she wanted to be the next Steve Jobs before she had built anything at all. She adopted his black turtleneck. She lowered the pitch of her voice, according to former colleagues, until it became a permanent baritone. She wasn't just building a company, she was building a version of herself that the company needed to exist. And that's the part history glosses over. What was actually happening in her mind is far stranger than the word liar can explain. In the 1970s and 80s, an evolutionary biologist named Robert Trivers, working out of Harvard, proposed something that unsettled a lot of psychologists. He argued that self-deception isn't a flaw in the human brain, it's a feature, deliberately installed by evolution. Here's the logic. If you want to lie to someone convincingly, the hardest part isn't crafting the lie. It's controlling all the small involuntary signals your body gives off when you know you're lying. The micro-hesitations, the pupil dilation, the shift in vocal pitch. Trivers argued that the most efficient way to hide those signals isn't to suppress them consciously, it's to not know you're lying at all. In other words, the brain deceives itself first, so it can deceive others more effectively second. This is exactly what was happening inside Elizabeth Holmes's head in that white room. She wasn't performing confidence over a lie she recognized as false. Multiple former employees testified that she seemed to genuinely believe the technology was close, always just months away, always one engineering breakthrough from working. She wasn't lying to investors. She had already lied to herself, successfully enough that the lie no longer felt like one. But that's only half the story. Because self-deception alone doesn't explain the scale of what happened at Theranos. For that, you need a second mechanism, one that psychologists call confirmation bias. First formally named by cognitive psychologist Peter Wason in 1960, in experiments at University College London, where he showed that people don't search for evidence that disproves what they believe. They search for evidence that confirms it, and they do it automatically, without realizing they're doing it at all. Holmes surrounded herself with people who confirmed the dream. Engineers who raised concerns were pushed out. In court, former lab director Adam Rosendorf described a culture where bad results were treated as anomalies to be explained away, rather than warnings to be heeded. Every dataset that fit the story of a working machine was kept. Every dataset that didn't was labeled an outlier. And here's what almost nobody knows about how deep this goes. Confirmation bias doesn't just filter information coming in. Neuroscience research using fMRI, including a notable 2016 study led by Peter Ditto and colleagues at UC Irvine, found that when people process information that threatens a belief they're emotionally invested in, the brain's reasoning centers actually show reduced activity, while emotional processing regions light up instead. The brain isn't failing to think, it's actively working to avoid thinking in a very literal, measurable sense. Let that sink in. The organ Holmes was using to build a $9 billion company was, in certain crucial moments, running on the same neural circuitry that makes a gambler certain the next hand will be the one that wins it all back. This is where it gets strange, because Silicon Valley didn't just tolerate this mental state, it manufactured it and rewarded it on an industrial scale. The phrase, "fake it till you make it," wasn't an accident of startup culture. It was closer to doctrine. Investors weren't funding working products most of the time, they were funding conviction. A founder who said, "I'm not sure this will work," got rejected in the pitch room. A founder who said, "This will change medicine forever," with total certainty in their eyes, got a check. The entire ecosystem selected, generation after generation, for people whose brains were exceptionally good at believing their own story before the evidence existed to support it. Holmes didn't invent this environment. She was, in a sense, its most successful product. So that settles it, right? Self-deception explains everything. Trivers was right, and Holmes was simply a brain caught in an evolutionary glitch. Well, not quite. Because there's a problem with that story, and it's an important one. Prosecutors in her 2022 trial presented evidence that complicates the picture considerably. Internal documents showed Theranos machines failing accuracy tests repeatedly, with results forwarded directly to Holmes. Text messages between her and her partner, Sunny Balwani, discussed financial pressures and investor targets in language that sounds less like blind faith and more like calculated strategy. A jury ultimately found her guilty on 4 counts of fraud, explicitly rejecting the idea that she simply didn't know. So which is it? Was she a woman who genuinely believed her own myth? A victim of the same self-deceptive machinery that exists in every human brain? Or was she a calculating operator who used the language of belief as a weapon, fully aware of the gap between what she said and what was true? The uncomfortable answer, according to psychologists who study fraud and self-deception together, like Dan Ariely at Duke University, is that it was probably both, and not in sequence but simultaneously. Ariely's research on dishonesty suggests the human mind doesn't need to choose between lying and believing. It can hold both at once, shifting fluidly between them depending on which one is more useful in a given moment. Full conviction while pitching a room of investors, cold calculation while reviewing a failing test result an hour later. This is the part that should unsettle you more than a simple villain ever could. Because a villain who knows exactly what they're doing is predictable. You can see them coming. But a mind that can genuinely believe its own certainty on Tuesday and calculate its own deception on Wednesday without ever registering the contradiction, that mind doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like lying from the inside. It feels like conviction. It feels like passion. It feels, from where Holmes was standing, like the truth. And honestly, that's what made Theranos so dangerous and so believable for so long. Nobody wants to invest in a fraud, but almost everybody wants to invest in belief. Now let's pause here, because this is the point where the story stops being about her. The mechanism that ran through Elizabeth Holmes's mind in that white room on that Tuesday afternoon isn't some rare neurological malfunction reserved for Silicon Valley con artists. It's standard equipment. It's sitting in your brain right now, quietly filtering the evidence you let in, quietly protecting the story you've already decided to believe about yourself, your relationship, your job, your future. The line between a visionary who sees what doesn't exist yet and a fraud who insists something works when it doesn't, that line isn't found in intention. It's found in evidence, in what happens after the belief meets the world and the world says no. Holmes kept talking as if the world hadn't spoken. This isn't a story about a monster. It's a story about what any sufficiently motivated brain can manufacture, given enough pressure, enough audience, and enough silence from the people around it. Somewhere, right now, someone is standing in a room just as confident as she was, and they have no idea which one they are yet.